The Silent Lullaby. It was the year 1857, and the small, barren village of Sarabpur lay under the ominous shadow of an abandoned haveli. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about the mansion, which had stood untouched for decades. They whispered of a haunting lullaby that echoed through the still night, pulling unwary souls into its sinister depths. None who entered the haveli ever returned. Abdullah was a 19-year-old boy who had recently returned to his village after the death of his father. The death was untimely, and he was so shaken that his mother, Fatima, found it tough to manage their livelihood. However, in this scenario, his decision to pursue studies in the madrasa at his village gave him the impetus to continue his journey. It was not much time before he heard these creepy stories about the haunted haveli. One evening, when the sunset had painted the village orange, Abdullah sat outside his small house, reading a book by the fading light. It was then that his childhood friend, Hussaina, came to him, her face ashen with worry. "Abdullah, have you heard about the cries last night?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked up, frowning. "Cries? What cries?" "They say the lullaby was heard again. Karim's son swears he saw a shadow near the haveli's gates," she said, lowering her voice. Abdullah had always dismissed the villagers' tales as superstition, but the fear in Hussaina's eyes made him pause. "It's just the wind playing tricks," he said, though doubt crept into his mind. Hussaina shook her head. "You don't understand. People who go near that place, they vanish, Abdullah." Later that night, lying in bed, the warning words of the villagers echoed through his head. The idea of a damned lullaby was nothing but pure fantasy, but he had a nagging, bizarre curiosity. Around midnight, he awoke to an unnatural stillness. The crickets had stopped chirping, and the air felt heavy. Then, faintly, he heard it, a soft, haunting melody. It was unlike anything he had ever heard, gentle yet mournful, as if calling out to him. Unable to resist, Abdullah got out of bed and stepped outside. The village seemed shrouded in an eerie silence. The melody grew louder, guiding him toward the haveli at the edge of the village. It stood there, towering gates weathered and vines that have grown there. The night air was as cold as any night, not even summer nights. Silence was deafening once the sweet melody stopped abruptly. Abdullah hesitated, his racing heart and screaming instincts saying he should have gone back and not come near. He pushed open the creaking gates, however, and stepped inside. There were broken statues littering the courtyard, as well as dry fountains. The smell of decay and something metallic wafted through the air. Abdullah saw faint footprints in the dust. He figured someone had walked through here not too long ago. "Who's there?" Abdullah shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. For a moment, there was no sound. Then, a gentle giggling came through the quietness. It was the sound of a child, yet the edge sounded sinister. Abdullah was frozen in his tracks, with a catch in his throat at the hitch in his breathing. "Leave, before it's too late," a whisper came from the darkness. Abdullah turned to find the source of the voice, but the courtyard was empty. Panic overcame him, and he turned to leave. Just as he did, the gates slammed shut with a loud clang, trapping him inside. The haunting melody sounded again, this time louder. It seemed to be coming from the mansion itself, calling him inside. Abdullah felt a strange compulsion to follow it, as if the music had him under some kind of hold. He went in through the broken doors of the haveli. He stood before a great hall, heavy with cobwebs and dust, the walls adorned with fading paintings whose subjects' eyes seemed to trail after him. The tension was thick and unplaceable. There was an old wooden cradle in the middle of the hall. It was swinging slightly, but there was no wind. Abdullah walked toward it slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. When he reached out to touch it, the lullaby ceased, and the room plunged into darkness. Suddenly, the room filled with ghostly blue light. Shadows danced upon the walls, and Abdullah saw the vision of a woman sitting beside the cradle, singing soft melodies to the child. Her face was covered from view, but the depth of sorrow was tangible. The vision shifted. The same woman was now standing over the cradle weeping. The child is gone, and the lullaby now a mournful wail. The room turned even colder, and the vision faded, leaving only Abdullah in the stifling darkness. Terrified, Abdullah fumbled towards the door as if to get out, but the Haveli came alive, the walls pressing in on him from all sides. The whispers sounded louder, overlapping each other into an incomprehensible din. "Free us," a voice implored, "or suffer the same fate." Abdullah shrieked, his cries echoing in the oppressive silence that followed. With one last heave of willpower, he opened the door and fled back to the village, the whispers following him until he was over the gates. As he stepped inside his house, he collapsed, gasping for air. He could not ignore the call of the Haveli. Whatever was haunting that place was not a myth, but a reality waiting to catch him off guard. Abdullah lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling while the previous night's events still haunted him. His breath was shallow, and his body shook with cold, as if chilled by the ghostly presence of the Haveli. Lullaby replayed his mind, soft yet sinister in its attempt to tempt him to come back. With all this fear, within him a flame of forbidden curiosity had been lit. The whole village was filled with gossip by morning. Hussaina came to Abdullah's house early, her face pale and her voice quivering. "Abdullah, did you hear?" she asked, closing the door behind her. "Hear what?" Abdullah replied, though he could guess. They found footprints near the Haveli gates. Someone saw lights inside. The elders think the curse has awakened again. Abdullah hesitated. Should he tell her the truth? That he had been the one inside the Haveli? As Hussaina spoke, Fatima entered the room, her face lined with worry. She carried a tray of tea and placed it on the table. "You two should stay away from that place," she said firmly. "The Haveli has already taken enough lives. Don't let it take yours too." He nodded. However, he could not erase a feeling that the Haveli was beckoning him. At night, when the village had settled into its silent manner, he prepared himself once more. This time, he wouldn't be caught off guard. He took a lantern, a small dagger, and a piece of chalk to mark his way. When the clock struck midnight, he stepped out of his house, his heart pounding with fear and anticipation. The air around the Haveli seemed colder than before, and the gates creaked open as if inviting him inside. The courtyard was eerily still, the broken statues casting long, twisted shadows under the moonlight. Abdullah went back to the grand hall, where the cradle was still standing, its wood polished as if untouched by time. He noticed something this time he hadn't seen before, a set of stairs leading down into darkness. As he went down, the air became heavier, and faint sobbing echoed through the narrow passage. At the bottom, he ended up in a dimly lit chamber lined with shelves of ancient books and scrolls. There was an old journal lying open on a table in the center of the room, its leather cover cracked with age. Abdullah opened it, revealing pages filled with strange symbols and faint sketches of the Haveli. The last page was marked with a single sentence in Urdu. "The lullaby binds the restless to this place." The sobbing grew louder as he read. Abdullah turned to find a woman standing at the far end of the room, her back to him. She wore a tattered dress, and her shoulders shook as if she were crying. "Who are you?" Abdullah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman slowly turned, veiling her face. She raised a hand, pointing at the journal. "Free them," she said in a voice soft yet commanding. "Free who?" She didn't have time to respond. The room started shaking violently, and shelves were toppling all around, while a deafening roar filled the air. Abdullah grabbed the journal and ran back up the stairs as the chamber collapsed behind him. The following day, Abdullah went to the village elders. he presented the journal and demanded an explanation. Initially, they did not want to say much, but with his persistent questioning, one of the oldest men, Baba Rafiq, opened his mouth. The Haveli belonged to Nawab Sarfaraz in the early 1800s, Baba Rafiq started. He was a cruel man, obsessed with power. They say he practiced black magic to control the spirits of the dead. The lullaby you hear is the voice of his daughter, Aisha. She was sacrificed in a ritual gone wrong. Abdullah shivered at these words. Why hasn't anybody tried to stop it? The curse binds the Haveli. No one who enters can escape its hold for long. Abdullah refused to accept this. He couldn't abandon the spirits trapped within the Haveli, especially Aisha's. Determined to break the curse, he returned to Hussaina and shared everything. "You're mad!" she exclaimed. "You saw what happened last time. You'll get yourself killed." "I have to try," Abdullah insisted. "I can't ignore this." Reluctantly, Hussaina agreed to help. Together, they prepared to face the Haveli one last time. That night, armed with the journal and a newfound resolve, Abdullah and Hussaina entered the Haveli. The atmosphere was even more oppressive, as if the mansion itself knew they were coming. They followed the marks Abdullah had left on his last visit, going down into the ruined chamber. They found, to their surprise, that the passage was changed. Walls were covered in glowing symbols, and sobbing turned to soft humming. At the end of the hall was a gigantic door inscribed with patterns. The final page of the journal was an inscription of the door along with the following phrase in Arabic: "Sacrifice to open." It made Abdullah's hands shaky when he read it aloud. The door groaned open with a creaky movement, revealing a hollow, round room lit pale by its surroundings. On it, a pedestal stood carrying a doll smeared with blood. As Abdullah approached, the ghostly figure of Aisha appeared before him, her veil lifted to reveal a face twisted with sorrow. "Set me free," she pleaded. "What do I have to do?" Abdullah asked. Aisha pointed to the doll. "Destroy it, but beware. The Haveli will not let you leave alive if you do." Abdullah hesitated, but Hussaina stepped forward. "We'll do it together," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. As they broke the doll, the room broke loose. Walls cracked and screamed in unearthly screams. Shadows charged towards them, clawing and tearing at their clothes. Abdullah ran out with Hussaina, holding her hand. The Haveli seemed to collapse behind them as they emerged just before the gate slammed shut. Breathlessly, they turned to see the Haveli engulfed in flames. The lullaby was silenced, and a profound stillness took over. The burning of the Haveli should have finally brought peace to Abdullah and Hussaina, but it did not. For days, the village buzzed with relief, claiming that the curse had finally been lifted. Yet, deep within Abdullah's heart, he felt a gnawing unease. Something was amiss. He could still hear the lullaby. It came to him in the dead of night, faint yet persistent, as though it traveled through the very air. It wasn't just in his dreams anymore. It followed him in his waking hours. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and whispers floated around him, too soft to decipher, but loud enough to send chills down his spine. On another lonely evening, Abdullah sat across, observing the remnants of the salvaged journal from the Haveli. Most of it got destroyed in the confusion with the escape, but some scraps are visible. One of them wrote, "The destruction of the vessel is not the end. The curse anchors itself into blood, binding it with the living until the cycle is broken." Abdullah's breath caught. He knew that burning the Haveli had not ended the curse, but simply displaced it. Whatever they'd freed, it was now tied to him. Or worse, to the entire village. He couldn't do this by himself. He sought out Hussaina, who had been avoiding him since the night they escaped the Haveli. "I don't want to talk about it, Abdullah," Hussaina said sharply when he knocked on her door. "Hussaina," "We can't ignore this," he insisted. "The lullaby hasn't stopped. Have you heard it?" She froze, her face betraying the fear she had been trying to hide. "Yes," she admitted reluctantly. "It's faint, but it's there." He pushed the journal across the table towards the pair of them. "The curse did not die with the Haveli. We've unleashed something, and it follows us." Hussaina shook, her hands turned over a few pages. "What do we do?" "We need to go back," said Abdullah, though the taste was ash in his mouth. Abdullah and Hussaina sought the counsel of Baba Rafiq once more, before returning to the ruins. The old man's face went ashen as he listened to their tale. "I warned you not to meddle with the Haveli," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "The curse is older than any of us. It cannot be destroyed. It can only be transferred." "Transferred?" Hussaina echoed. "The curse latches onto those who interfere," Baba Rafiq explained. "It won't stop until it consumes you, or until you pass it to another." Abdullah's fists clenched. "There has to be another way." "There is," Baba Rafiq said grimly, "but it comes at a cost." Baba Rafiq explained that this old ritual could break the hold of this curse. For them to seek the heart of this curse that was also attached to this original ritual with Aisha's spirit. The heart should be lying somewhere at the bottom of the destroyed Haveli, Baba Rafiq said. Its retrieving will ignite the whole force of this curse within. Prepare your minds and yourselves for facing what is going to be awakened. Armed with this knowledge, Abdullah and Hussaina gathered their supplies, holy verses inscribed on parchment, vials of blessed water, and a sturdy shovel. The ruins of the Haveli were a blackened skeleton against the night sky. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt wood and something else, something metallic and sharp, like blood. As they entered the courtyard, the temperature dropped. The lullaby grew louder, its haunting melody weaving through the air. Shadows danced along the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human. Abdullah led the way to the spot where the chamber had collapsed. Using the journal's fragments as a guide, they began digging. Hours went by, and the dirt became tougher to dig up. At the last minutes of their exhaustion, the shovel of Hussaina struck something hard. They found a small, ornate chest, and its surface was covered in intricate carvings. Abdullah looked at it, his hand hesitating before opening it, shuddering as he turned the lid open. A black heart lay inside, shrunk and pulsating faintly, like living tissue. As soon as the chest was opened, the ground shook beneath their feet. A scream torn through the night air. The shadows surged toward them, coalescing into grotesquely twisted figures. Abdullah recited the verses Baba Rafiq had given them. His voice was shaking but steady. Hussaina hurled the blessed water at the shadows, which recoiled with inhuman shrieks. The figures surrounded them, their clawed hands reaching. Abdullah held the heart aloft, and he chanted louder. The shadows closed in. A crackle of energy rent the air, and lullaby grew deafening in its sound, drowning out the rest. Aisha's ghost showed up, her face no longer contorted in sorrow, but twisted in rage. "You can't break what was bound in blood," she hissed. Abdullah faced her. "Your suffering ends tonight," he said. He plunged the heart into the ground with a final incantation. A blinding light erupted and shadows dissolved into ash. Aisha let out one last scream before she vanished into the light. When the light faded, the ruins were silent. The chill of the air was gone, and there was an eerie warmth that filled the space. Abdullah and Hussaina stood in the center of the courtyard, chest and heart nowhere to be found. The lullaby was silent for the first time in days. Abdullah and Hussaina had gone back to the village thinking they had ended the curse. The shadows did not follow them anymore, and the haunting lullaby was silent. For the first time in weeks, they felt the weight lifting from their chests. But the village was not the same. The air was still, unnervingly so, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The villagers whispered of strange occurrences, livestock disappearing, shadows flickering in the moonlight, and an unnatural silence that seemed to creep into every home. The curse, it seemed, had not been destroyed. It had merely shifted. It was Hussaina who first noticed the signs. One night, as she prepared to sleep, she caught sight of a figure standing outside her window. At first, she thought it was Abdullah, but the figure was too still, too tall, and its face, when it turned toward her, was a pale, featureless void. She screamed, and when Abdullah rushed to her aid, the figure was gone. "We didn't end it," Hussaina whispered, her voice shaking. "We just made it worse." The next morning, Abdullah looked for Baba Rafiq, who appeared even more worn out than usual. "The curse's roots go deeper than the Haveli," Baba Rafiq explained. Before the Haveli was built, there was an ancient well, a place of dark rituals and blood sacrifices. The Haveli's foundation was laid atop it to seal its power, but your actions have awakened it. Abdullah felt a chill run down his spine. "Where is this well?" Baba Rafiq hesitated, then replied, "It lies beneath the ruins. You must go back and seal it before its power spreads further." Abdullah and Hussaina reluctantly returned to the Haveli's ruins, this time armed with new talismans and prayers. The once familiar sight now felt alien, as though the land itself had been corrupted. With much effort, they uncovered the entrance to the well, a stone slab carved with ancient symbols. As they pried it open, a wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the faint sound of a child's laughter. The descent was treacherous. The narrow stone steps spiraled down into the earth, and the deeper they went, the darker it became. Their lanterns flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. At the bottom, they found a cavernous chamber. The walls were lined with ancient carvings showing scenes of sacrifice and suffering. In the center, the well stood, like a yawning abyss that seemed to breathe. Its edges bore strange, pulsating runes. The air was heavy with malevolence, and the lullaby started again, louder than ever. It was no longer a song, but a cacophony of wails and whispers, each voice overlapping the other in a maddening chorus. Hussaina clutched Abdullah's arm. "What do we do?" "We seal it," Abdullah said, though he wasn't sure how. They laid the talismans about the well and started chanting the incantations Baba Rafiq had provided for them. The runes at the edge of the well began to stir, a sickly yellowish glow illuminating it with otherworldly luminescence. The earthquake struck, however, during the climax of the ritual. The shadows inside walls took form and writhed in darkness. No longer silhouettes, but now memories, the way things used to be, diffuse ghostly recreations of what had transpired there. Abdullah and Hussaina saw horrors as the shadows replayed the scenes. Children being dragged to the well, their screams being silenced as they were thrown into the abyss. As the final verse was being spoken, a figure emerged from the well, a towering entity in darkness. Its face was a mask of twisted features, and its voice was a guttural roar that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "You dare disturb my domain," it growled, its voice reverberating through the chamber. Abdullah stood his ground, holding the talismans aloft. "We will end this. You will no longer haunt our village." The entity laughed, a sound that sent waves of terror through them. "You cannot destroy what is eternal. You can only feed it." The entity revealed the truth. The well could only be sealed with a sacrifice, a life willingly given to satiate its hunger. Abdullah and Hussaina exchanged a horrified glance. "There must be another way," Hussaina pleaded. "There is not," the entity said. "Choose, or your village will perish." Abdullah stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "No!" Hussaina cried, grabbing his arm. "You have a family, Hussaina," Abdullah said softly. "I have no one left. Let me do this." As Abdullah approached the well, the entity watched with a gleeful expression. He knelt at the edge, clutching the talismans in one hand and the journal in the other. He whispered a prayer before leaping into the abyss. As soon as his body disappeared, the well exploded with light. The shadows screamed and dispersed. The runes on the edge of the well burnt away, and the lullaby fell silent once more. Hussaina fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. The well was sealed, but at an unimaginable cost. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon when Hussaina emerged from the ruins. It was different for the village lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted. Hussaina knew that she would never forget the sacrifice that Abdullah made. His name would live on as the man who saved them all. The days following Abdullah's sacrifice were shrouded in an unworldly silence. The village seemed to regain normalcy, but the feeling of foreboding lingered in the air. Hussaina carried the weight of Abdullah's decision like a shadow, but she was going to honor his memory, come what may. Peace was not meant to be long-lived. It started subtly. Children murmuring about strange figures at the edge of the forest, villagers hearing faint cries at night, and the chilling reappearance of the lullaby. Hussaina dismissed these as remnants of collective fear, a trauma not easily erased. But then she heard it herself. Late one night when the village was asleep, the hum began. It was a hauntingly familiar melody, soft but insistent. Her heart racing, Hussaina followed the sound to her window. There, under the ancient neem, stood a child. It was hard to make out its features, but its outline shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Before she could react, the figure pointed towards the forest and vanished. Hussaina ran to Baba Rafiq in a desperate search for answers. The old man listened intently as his face whitened with each word. "You were wrong," Hussaina said, her voice trembling. "The well wasn't the source of the curse. There's something else, something deeper." Baba Rafiq slowly nodded his head. The curse could have been silenced temporarily, but such darkness cannot be destroyed so easily. The well was but a vessel. The evil lies within the forest, where it all began. He gave her a leather-bound book, worn and aged. "This contains the oldest records of our village. If you want to end this, you have to go to the heart of the forest and face the source. But be warned, it might demand a sacrifice far greater than Abdullah's." With what little courage she managed to gather, Hussaina set out long before dawn. Armed with the journal, the talismans, and a prayer on her lips, she entered the forest. The air grew colder as she ventured deeper, the towering trees closing in around her. The lullaby grew louder, its melody twisting and warping into a cacophony of despair. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision, and the ground beneath her feet felt alive, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. She stumbled upon ancient ruins, crumbling stone pillars wrapped in vines, their surfaces etched with symbols similar to those on the well. At the center of the ruins was an altar, its surface smeared with dark, dried blood. When Hussaina reached the altar, the ground started to shake. A figure came into view, a ghostly woman dressed in tattered robes. Her eyes glowed malevolently. "I am the keeper," said the woman in a voice full of authority. "You have caused the balance to shift. This well was never meant to be capped." Hussaina stood her ground, clasping a talisman to her chest. "This curse has plagued us for generations. It has to stop." The keeper laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You speak of ending what cannot be undone. The lullaby is eternal, a song born of sacrifice and suffering. If you seek to silence it, you must sever its origin." The keeper gestured to the altar. "But doing so will unravel more than you can comprehend." The keeper revealed the truth. Centuries ago, the village had been home to a secretive cult. They worshipped a being of immense power, offering children as sacrifices to bind its essence. The lullaby was their hymn, a melody designed to soothe the entity and keep it dormant. But when the sacrifice ended, the creature rose to its surface, and the anger was poured upon the world. The well, the Haveli, and the forest were only a facade of its strength. "If you want to end this," said the keeper, "then you have to destroy the altar. But by doing that, the creature in full form will be released in the world. You choose." There she had an impossible choice: destroy the altar, risking unleashing the thing, or leave it standing and condemn the village to a living hell. As she decided, the shadows around her seemed to coalesce into nightmarish forms, figures with hollow eyes, their mouths stitched shut. They reached for her, their touch icy and suffocating. Hussaina remembered Abdullah's bravery, and she found the strength to act. She raised the talisman and slammed it onto the altar. The light explosion was blinding. The shadows screamed and disintegrated, the forest shaking to the deafening crescendo of the lullaby. From the ruin arose a towering figure, a monstrous being of shadow and fire, its presence overwhelming. The entity roared, its rage shaking the very earth. But Hussaina was not alone. The talisman's power summoned Abdullah's spirit, his form glowing with a warm golden light. "Abdullah," Hussaina cried. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady. "Together, we can end this." Abdullah and Hussaina combined their strength, chanting the verses Baba Rafiq had taught them. The entity lashed out, its tendrils of darkness striking at them, but their faith held firm. As the entity weakened, it became clear that one final act was needed to seal it forever. The keeper, now free from her spectral prison, revealed the key. Someone must offer their life at the altar. "I'll do it," Hussaina said, stepping forward. "No," Abdullah said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You must live to tell our story, to ensure this never happens again." Before she could protest, Abdullah placed the talisman on the altar and said the final prayer. The entity let out a final, earth-shattering scream before collapsing into the altar. The ruins crumbled, the forest fell silent, and the lullaby was no more. Hussaina came out of the forest alone, her heart heavy, but her spirit resolute. The village would rebuild, and Abdullah's name would live on as the man who ended the curse. But deep in the forest, beneath the rubble of the altar, a faint hum could still be heard. The air in the village was quiet, eerily so, and the people, unaware of the battle that had gone on in the forest, carried on like nothing had changed. Yet Hussaina felt it in her bones. The curse had not been completely lifted. There was one chapter left to be unraveled, one final echo of the lullaby. It started the day after Hussaina returned from the forest. She heard it as she was tending to her garden. Another faint, almost imperceptible hum drifting through the air like a phantom melody. She froze, her heart pounding. "No," she whispered to herself. "It's over. It has to be over." However, it was getting louder and began at nighttime. People were now complaining about vivid dreams themselves standing by the window, and in this dream, they would find a little child staring at their soul. Again, the lullaby was heard, but it differed. It wasn't locked to the forest this time, but spreading outwards. Desperate for answers, Hussaina began to read the journal Baba Rafiq had given her. Deep within the final pages, she found a chilling revelation. The keeper was never an ally. She was the guardian of the essence of the entity, and by breaking the altar, Hussaina had set her free. The essence of the keeper remained in the village, feeding on the fear and memories of the people. She would rebuild the entity if not stopped, and it would come back stronger than ever. Hussaina gathered the villagers in the masjid, recounting her journey and the horrors she had faced. "We are all part of this," she said. "This curse has taken too many of our loved ones. If we do not act now, it will consume us all." Some were skeptical, others terrified, but a few brave souls, including Baba Rafiq, pledged to help. "We must confront her together," Hussaina said. "She feeds on our division. Only unity can weaken her." As the villagers prepared, The keeper unleashed her fury. The lullaby grew louder, now audible throughout the village. Shadows crept into homes, extinguishing lanterns and causing livestock to panic. Children began disappearing, their cries merging with the haunting melody. Hussaina led a group to the forest, now shrouded in a dense, unnatural mist. The keeper's presence was palpable, her whispers echoing through the trees. "Why fight me?" her voice taunted. "I am the mother of your fears, the cradle of your nightmares. Embrace me, and I will spare you." But Hussaina continued, her faith unshaken. Baba Rafiq explained the ritual that could banish the keeper forever. A circle of unity, formed by the villagers, would trap her essence. They would need to chant verses from the Quran, while Hussaina, as the chosen one, confronted the keeper directly. "It will take everything you have," Baba Rafiq warned, "but it is the only way." As the villagers formed the circle, the keeper emerged, her form shifting between a spectral woman and a monstrous shadow. "You dare challenge me," she roared, her voice shaking the ground. Hussaina stepped forward, clutching the talisman. "Your reign ends here." The battle was unlike anything Hussaina had ever faced. The keeper lashed out with tendrils of darkness, her cries a deafening wail that threatened to break the circle. The villagers held firm, their chants growing louder as Hussaina fought to weaken the keeper. Memories flooded Hussaina's mind. Her parents, Abdullah, the children lost to the lullaby. Each memory strengthened her resolve. "You have no power over me," she declared. With a final shot of energy, Hussaina thumped the talisman into the ground. The keeper shrieked in pain as the circle of unity trapped her essence. As the rite reached its climax, the lullaby broke, dissolving into silence. Keeper's form disintegrated, and her essence was pulled into the talisman, which shattered into pieces. The forest fell silent, mist lifting to reveal a dawn unlike any other. For the first time in generations, the air was free of fear. The villagers went back to their homes, shaken but hopeful. Baba Rafiq assured them the curse was broken, but Hussaina knew that scars would take time to heal. She stood on the edge of the forest, looking up at the rising sun. "It's over," she whispered. "Finally, it's over." But deep in her heart, a question persisted. Had they really broken the curse, or merely delayed its return? As she walked back into the village, a faint hum echoed behind her. She turned, but there was nothing there.